15 years of loyalty. And I thought this company was my second home. But on one cold morning, they discarded me like surplus inventory. I cried, I crumbled. I felt my world collapse beneath my feet. They thought I'd disappear quietly into obscurity. They never imagined that a woman like me could weaponize her pain and bring down their billion-dollar empire. This is how I turned betrayal into the most expensive mistake they ever made. My name is Emily Carson. And for 15 years, I was the backbone of Vertex Dynamics' finance department in Ridgewater. At 38, I'd spent my entire adult career in that glass tower overlooking the city, watching seasons change through conference room windows while my life revolved around quarterly reports and budget meetings. I was always the first to arrive, my keycard beeping at 6:30 a.m. sharp, coffee in hand, heels clicking against marble floors that reflected the early morning light. The security guards knew me by name. The cleaning staff would wave as I passed. I'd built relationships with everyone from the mailroom to the C-suite, believing naively that loyalty meant something in corporate America. My desk on the 14th floor had become a second home. Photos of my daughter's first day of school sat next to achievement awards and certificates of excellence. I'd missed her recitals for board meetings, postponed vacations for fiscal year ends, and answered emails during family dinners. Daniel, my husband, had stopped complaining years ago. He understood this was who I was, or who I'd become. I'd turned down 3 headhunting offers in the last 5 years alone. Competitors wanted my expertise, my client relationships, my ability to turn chaos into organized spreadsheets that made sense to investors. But I stayed. I believed in Vertex Dynamics. I believed in the vision Richard Hale sold us every quarter, that we were building something revolutionary in tech, that we were a family. The morning it happened started like any other. October rain pelted the windows as I reviewed the third quarter projections. My assistant knocked, unusual, since she typically just sent emails. Behind her stood 2 security guards and Martin from HR, his face deliberately neutral. "Emily," Martin said, not meeting my eyes. "We need to speak with you." The walk to HR felt endless. Colleagues I'd worked with for years suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. The copy machine's hum seemed deafening. My heart hammered as Martin closed the conference room door behind us. Due to restructuring initiatives, he read from a prepared statement. "Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately." The words hung in the air like smoke. 15 years. 15 years of 60-hour weeks, of choosing this company over everything else, reduced to corporate jargon on a single sheet of paper. "This is a mistake," I heard myself saying. "The Goldman Sachs deal. I'm the only one who knows the entire structure. The audit next month. The decision is final." Martin slid a manila folder across the table. "Your severance package. We'll need your keycard and company phone." Security escorted me back to my desk, and watched as I placed personal items in a cardboard box. The photos of my daughter. The succulent I'd kept alive for 3 years. My favorite pen. 15 years condensed into a box that weighed less than my laptop bag. The elevator ride down felt like descending into an abyss. Through the lobby where I'd celebrated promotions, past the cafe where I'd mentored junior analysts, out through revolving doors that expelled me onto rain-soaked streets. I stood there, box in hand, watching through the glass as my former life continued without me. People rushed past, avoiding eye contact with the woman holding the cardboard box, the universal symbol of corporate disposal. My phone, my personal phone now, buzzed with messages from colleagues. "I'm so sorry. This is insane. Call me if you need anything." Empty words from people who would forget my name within a month. As I sat in my car in the parking garage I'd paid for monthly for 15 years, rain drumming on the windshield, I finally let myself feel it. The humiliation, the betrayal, the rage that started as a spark in my chest and spread like wildfire through my veins. They'd taken everything I'd built and thrown me away like yesterday's garbage. But sitting there, mascara running, hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, I made myself a promise. This wasn't over. They thought they were done with Emily Carson, but they had no idea what they'd just unleashed. The drive home was a blur. I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes, unable to face the house I might lose, the life I could no longer afford. When I finally walked through the door at 11 a.m., a time I'd never been home on a weekday, Daniel was at his desk, working from home. He looked up, saw my face, and immediately knew. "They let you go?" His voice was soft, careful, like speaking to someone on a ledge. I nodded, unable to form words. He wrapped me in his arms, but I felt nothing. Numbness had replaced the rage, a protective shell my mind had erected against the reality crashing down around me. The first week was the darkest. I'd wake at 5:30 a.m. out of habit, then remember I had nowhere to go. My daughter Sophie, only 8, kept asking why mommy was home for dinner every night. "Are you sick?" she'd ask. And I'd force a smile, lying that everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. The mortgage payment was $4,200 a month. Private school tuition for Sophie was another $2,000. Health insurance through Cobra would cost $1,800. The severance package that seemed generous in that conference room would last 6 months if we were careful. 4 if we maintained our current lifestyle. Daniel's freelance graphic design work brought in maybe $3,000 a month. Good supplementary income, but not enough to carry us. I started the humiliating ritual of updating my resume, reaching out to contacts, pretending enthusiasm for new opportunities when inside I was drowning. The rejection emails came swiftly. "We've decided to go with another candidate. The position has been filled internally. We'll keep your resume on file." Each one felt like another slap, another confirmation that at 38, I was already being replaced by younger, cheaper alternatives. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake calculating, how long before we'd have to pull Sophie from her school? How long before we'd need to sell the house? Daniel tried to stay positive, but I caught him browsing real estate listings in cheaper neighborhoods, researching public schools. My former colleagues stopped texting after 2 weeks. The friends who'd promised to help went silent. I was a reminder of everyone's worst fear, that loyalty meant nothing, that any of us could be next. I started drinking wine at 3 p.m., just to blur the edges of reality. 1 bottle became 2. Daniel would find me on the couch, laptop open to job sites, wine glass empty, tears streaming down my face. Sophie started tiptoeing around me, this broken version of her mother she didn't recognize. The credit card bills arrived like monthly reminders of my failure. The balance I'd always paid in full now accrued interest. The investment account we'd never touched got smaller with each withdrawal. I watched our financial security evaporate like morning mist. 3 weeks after the firing, Bank of America called. The mortgage payment was late. "There must be some mistake," I said, knowing there wasn't. The sympathetic voice on the other end offered payment plans, forbearance options, charity for the newly desperate. I hit rock bottom on a Tuesday night. Daniel was at a client meeting, Sophie at a sleepover. I sat on the bathroom floor with a bottle of pills in my hand, wondering if my life insurance would at least save them from my failure. The thought of Sophie at my funeral stopped me. I flushed the pills and sobbed until my throat was raw. The next morning, hungover and hollow. I forced myself to shower, to put on makeup, to pretend I was still the woman who'd commanded boardrooms. I drove past Vertex Dynamics, saw my old parking spot filled by someone else's car, watched my former colleagues heading to lunch at our usual spot. That's when I saw him, Richard Hale, the CEO who'd signed my termination, laughing as he got into his Tesla, probably headed to another investor lunch where he'd brag about cutting costs and improving margins. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. He had no idea what he'd done to my family. Or maybe he did, and simply didn't care. We were numbers on a spreadsheet, casualties of capitalism, acceptable losses in the pursuit of profit. That night, I told Daniel the truth about our finances. We had 3 months, maybe 4, before everything collapsed. He held me as I cried, whispering that we'd figure it out, that this wasn't my fault. But it felt like my fault. I'd believed in a company that saw me as disposable. I'd sacrificed everything for a lie. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, something shifted. The despair that had consumed me for weeks crystallized into something harder, sharper. They'd broken me down to nothing. But from nothing, I had nothing left to lose. The call came on a Friday evening, 6 weeks after my termination. Lauren Mitchells, a former colleague from accounting, slurred slightly on the other end. "Emily, can we meet? Not over the phone, in person?" We met at a dive bar downtown, far from Vertex's gleaming towers. Lauren looked terrible, dark circles, trembling hands wrapped around her whiskey. She'd lost weight, and her usually perfect manicure was chipped. "They're going to fire me too," she said without preamble. "Monday, HR already scheduled the meeting." "Lauren, I'm so sorry." "No, listen." She leaned forward, voice dropping. "It's not about restructuring. It never was. They're cleaning house before the Sigma acquisition." My heart stopped. "What acquisition?" "The one they've been hiding from the SEC. The one where they've been cooking books for 2 years to inflate our valuation." Lauren pulled out her phone, hands shaking. "I've been copying everything. Emily, the third quarter numbers you saw? Fabricated? The Goldman deal? Built on fraudulent projections. They fired you because you would have found out during the audit." The room spun, everything clicked into place, the sudden termination. The timing before the annual audit. The way they'd rushed me out without transition time. "They've been routing fake revenue through shell companies in Delaware," Lauren continued. "Richard and the CFO, Tom Bradley, they stand to make $500 million when Sigma buys us. But if the real numbers came out, the deal would collapse," I finished. "And they'd face federal charges." Lauren slid a USB drive across the table. "Everything's on here. Emails, doctored spreadsheets, recorded conversations. I started collecting it when they asked me to alter the revenue recognition patterns. I thought I was paranoid. But then they fired you, and I knew." "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because they destroyed you. And you're the only one with nothing left to lose and the expertise to understand what this means." She finished her whiskey in one gulp. "And because I'm scared, they threatened me. Emily. Said if I talked, they'd ruin me worse than they ruined you." That night, I sat at my laptop until dawn, reviewing the files. Each document was another piece of evidence. Emails between Richard and Tom discussing, adjusting numbers, spreadsheets showing the real figures versus what was reported, wire transfer records to accounts that didn't match any legitimate vendors. My hands shook as I opened a folder labeled EM Termination. There it was, emails from 2 months before I was fired. Richard writing to Tom, "Emily's too thorough. She'll spot the Sigma prep during the audit. We need her gone before Q4. Tom's response, "Agreed. I'll have Martin prep a restructuring narrative." They'd planned it. My entire destruction had been orchestrated to protect their crime. I made copies of everything, cloud storage, external drives, even printed copies hidden in Sophie's old toy chest. Then I started my own investigation, using my finance expertise to trace the money flows, building a timeline of the fraud. The scope was staggering. $2.3 billion in fabricated revenue over 24 months. Fake customer contracts. Phantom inventory. They'd turned Vertex Dynamics into an elaborate Ponzi scheme. And they were about to cash out while employees' retirement funds, invested in company stock, would become worthless when the truth emerged. I called Lauren the next day. "How many people know?" "Maybe 5 in total, but they're all either in on it or too scared to speak." "Who else did they fire recently?" "Marcus from legal, about a month before you. Jennifer from compliance, 3 months ago." A pattern. They'd systematically removed anyone who might expose them. I reached out to Marcus first. Like me, he'd been devastated by the termination. Unlike me, he'd already suspected something. I started asking questions about some unusual contract structures. He told me over coffee. Next week, I was gone. Jennifer's story was similar. She'd flagged suspicious transactions, then found herself unemployed after 17 years with the company. We formed an unlikely alliance, the discarded employees who knew too much. Lauren, still inside but living in fear. Marcus with his legal knowledge. Jennifer with her compliance expertise. And me, with the financial acumen to tie it all together. Over the next 2 weeks, we built our case. I barely slept, fueled by rage and the intoxicating possibility of justice. Daniel watched me transform from broken to obsessed, worried but supportive. They stole everything from us, I told him one night, showing him the evidence. Our savings, our security, our future. But they made one mistake. What's that? They left me alive and angry. The final piece came from an unexpected source. A junior analyst, Kevin, reached out through LinkedIn. Ms. Carson, I found something odd in the system. Your access wasn't fully revoked. You can still see the shared drive archives. For 12 hours, I downloaded everything I could access before they discovered the oversight. Years of evidence, including a recorded conference call where Richard explicitly discussed managing the numbers for Sigma. By the end of week 8 after my termination, I had everything. Documented fraud totaling $2.3 billion, evidence of conspiracy, proof of wrongful termination to cover up crimes, and a clear trail leading directly to Richard Hale and Tom Bradley. The question now wasn't whether I had a case, it was what to do with this nuclear bomb of information. Finding the right lawyer felt like looking for a weapon. I needed someone who wasn't just competent, but hungry. Someone who'd see this case as their career-defining moment. After a dozen consultations with attorneys who seemed more interested in quick settlements than justice, I found Michael Reyes. His office wasn't in a gleaming tower, but a converted warehouse in the Arts District. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings of his victories against corporate giants. Emily Carson, he said, standing to shake my hand. I've been following Vertex's stock movement. Something stinks there. How would you like to expose the biggest corporate fraud in Ridgewater's history? His eyes lit up. I spent 3 hours walking him through the evidence, watching his expression shift from skepticism to amazement to something predatory. Jesus Christ, he whispered, reviewing the doctored spreadsheets. This isn't just fraud. This is racketeering, conspiracy, securities fraud, and about 12 other federal crimes. He looked up at me. You realize what you have here? A way to destroy them? A nuclear arsenal. But Emily, once we file this, they'll come at you with everything. They'll try to bury you in legal fees, destroy your reputation, make your life hell. They already did that when they fired me. Michael leaned back, studying me. Most wrongful termination suits settle for maybe a year's salary. But this... He gestured at the evidence. With the whistleblower provisions, the wrongful termination, the personal damages, we're not talking settlement. We're talking about bringing down a billion-dollar company. Good. He smiled then, sharp and dangerous. My retainer is usually $50,000, but for this, I'll work on contingency. 40% of whatever we win. 30, 35, and I bring in my entire team. We shook hands, and I felt the first spark of hope in 2 months. Michael's team was small but fierce. 2 junior associates who worked like demons, a forensic accountant who spoke numbers like poetry, and a former SEC investigator who knew exactly how to package our evidence for maximum impact. We spent weeks building the case. 3 separate lawsuits that would hit simultaneously: wrongful termination, whistleblower retaliation, and a shareholder derivative suit on behalf of all employees whose retirement funds were invested in company stock. The wrongful termination is our wedge, Michael explained, his office now a war room with documents covering every surface. It gets us in the door, but the fraud evidence, that's what will bury them. We're not just seeking damages for you. We're exposing crimes that will trigger federal investigation. The strategy was surgical. File the wrongful termination suit first. Let them think it was just a disgruntled employee. Then, during discovery, unleash the fraud evidence. By the time they realized what hit them, it would be too late. What about criminal charges? I asked. Once we file, the SEC and Justice Department will have no choice but to investigate. Richard Hale and Tom Bradley could face 20 years in federal prison. The number Michael proposed as damages took my breath away. $100 million. That's insane, I said. No, it's calculated. Your lost wages and benefits over expected career span, $3 million, emotional distress, $2 million. But the whistleblower provisions allow for treble damages when termination is to cover fraud. Add punitive damages for the deliberate nature of their actions. The shareholder suit components. He showed me the breakdown. If anything, we're being conservative. Lauren was terrified but agreed to testify. Marcus and Jennifer signed on as co-plaintiffs for their own wrongful termination suits. Kevin, the junior analyst, became our inside source, carefully documenting the company's attempts to further cover their tracks. The night before filing, I couldn't sleep. Daniel found me at 3 a.m., reviewing the complaint one more time. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "Once you file, there's no going back. They destroyed our life to protect their lies. They made Sophie see her mother broken. They made you watch our savings disappear." I closed the laptop. I'm not just sure. I'm ready for war. Michael had one final surprise. "I've been in touch with a journalist at the Wall Street Journal. The day we file, she'll have the exclusive. Vertex won't be able to control the narrative. Won't that prejudice the jury? There won't be a jury. With this evidence and public pressure, they'll either settle for our full demand or face criminal prosecution. Either way, we win." The final preparation was personal. I bought a new suit, not designer, but sharp, professional. I got my hair done, had my nails manicured. If I was going to war, I'd look like the executive they'd discarded, not the broken woman they'd created. "Remember," Michael said the morning of filing, "from the moment we submit this, you're not a victim, you're a whistleblower, a fighter, a woman seeking justice. Every word you say, every expression, every gesture will be scrutinized. Be ready." I've been ready since the day they destroyed me. At exactly 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, 10 weeks after my termination, Michael Reyes filed Carson v. Vertex Dynamics in federal court. Simultaneously, the Wall Street Journal published, "Explosive lawsuit alleges massive fraud at tech giant Vertex Dynamics." My phone exploded with calls. Former colleagues, reporters, people I hadn't heard from in years. I ignored them all, watching from Michael's office as Vertex's stock price began its death spiral. "They know now," Michael said, refreshing the stock ticker. "Right about now, Richard Hale is in an emergency board meeting, realizing his empire is about to collapse." I thought I'd feel satisfaction, but all I felt was cold determination. This was just the beginning. The counterattack came swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, Vertex had assembled a legal team that looked like a who's who of corporate defense. 3 firms, 27 lawyers, led by Harrison Blackwood, known for crushing whistleblowers into dust. Their first move was predictable, a motion to dismiss, claiming I was a disgruntled former employee seeking to extort her successful former employer. They painted me as unstable, vindictive, someone who couldn't accept that her position had been legitimately eliminated. But the real assault was personal. Suddenly, anonymous sources were telling reporters about my drinking problem. A photo surfaced of me buying wine at 10 a.m. They didn't mention it was for a dinner party. Former colleagues I'd trusted gave quotes about my erratic behavior in my final weeks, carefully omitting that they'd been pressured by HR. Emily Carson was always difficult to work with. Read one particularly vicious quote in TechCrunch. She thought she was irreplaceable. When she learned she wasn't, she couldn't handle it. My LinkedIn profile was bombarded with fake reviews. My Twitter account was hacked, then filled with unhinged rants before I could recover it. Sophie came home crying because kids at school said her mom was crazy and going to jail. Michael had warned me, but living it was different. I stopped going to the grocery store after someone confronted me in the cereal aisle, calling me a bitter bitch trying to destroy honest businesses. Daniel's clients started canceling contracts, not wanting association with the scandal. The legal pressure was equally intense. Vertex filed a countersuit for defamation, theft of proprietary information, and breach of confidentiality agreements. They sought $50 million in damages and an injunction preventing me from discussing anything about the company. "It's intimidation," Michael said, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "They're trying to bury us in paper, drain your resources, make you settle for nothing." The first hearing was a disaster. Judge Patricia Elders, known for her pro-business stance, seemed skeptical of our claims. Harrison Blackwood painted me as a corporate terrorist, someone who'd stolen information and was now trying to blackmail the company. "Your Honor," Blackwood intoned, his voice dripping condescension. "Ms. Carson had performance issues, which led to her termination. Now she's fabricating evidence, manipulating documents, and trying to destroy a company that employs thousands of innocent people." Yours, when Michael presented our initial evidence, Blackwood objected to everything. Stolen information. Taken out of context. Inadmissible. Judge Elders sustained most of his objections. We left court that day with almost nothing admitted into evidence. The reporters who'd initially supported me now questioned whether I was just another vengeful employee. Vertex fights back against baseless accusations. Read the Reuters headline. Lauren cracked under the pressure. She called me sobbing, saying she couldn't testify. They promoted me, Emily. Gave me your old job. If I testify, I lose everything. I have kids. I'm sorry. The line went dead. She'd been bought. Marcus lasted another week before withdrawing from the case. His new employer had suggested it would be best for his career. Jennifer held on, but I could see her wavering. 3 weeks into the legal battle, we were losing. Vertex's stock had recovered. The narrative had shifted from corporate fraud to frivolous lawsuit. My evidence was trapped in legal limbo, inadmissible without corroborating witnesses who were too terrified to speak. Then Blackwood made it personal. At a deposition, he questioned me for 9 hours straight. Every mistake I'd ever made, every personal struggle, every moment of weakness was dissected. "Isn't it true you were drinking heavily before your termination? Isn't it true your marriage was struggling? Isn't it true you threatened Mr. Hale in an email? That's taken out of context. Just answer yes or no, Ms. Carson." By hour 7, I was shaking. Blackwood smiled, smelling blood. "Ms. Carson, isn't this really about jealousy? You were passed over for promotion 3 times. Younger employees were advancing past you. You couldn't accept that your time was over. That's not... You created these documents after your termination, didn't you? You fabricated evidence because you couldn't accept being ordinary, replaceable. No. You're lying now, aren't you? Just like you've lied about everything." I looked him straight in the eye. "No, Mr. Blackwood. The only liars in this case are your clients who stole billions and destroyed lives to cover it up." Michael objected, but the damage was done. The deposition video would be brutal if leaked, which of course it was, selectively edited to make me look unhinged. The worst came when someone spray-painted "liar" on our garage door. Sophie saw it before we could clean it off. That night, I found Daniel researching apartments in other cities. "Maybe we should just settle," he said quietly. "Take whatever they offer and start over somewhere else." "They haven't offered anything." "They will. Michael says they might go as high as $200,000 if we sign an NDA and drop everything. $200,000, not even enough to cover what we'd lost, let alone justice for their crimes. Kevin, our inside source, went dark after security escorted him out. His email account was deactivated, phone disconnected. The message was clear: talk and be destroyed. By week 4 of the battle, I was isolated, exhausted, and nearly broken. The evidence that had seemed so powerful was locked away by legal maneuvering. The witnesses had been bought or scared off. The media had turned against me. Michael called an emergency meeting. His usual confidence was gone. "Emily, they're winning. Judge Elders is likely to dismiss the case next week. We need to consider settlement while it's still on the table. No. Emily. I said no. There has to be another way. But sitting in my car afterward, watching Vertex's tower gleam in the sunset, I wondered if I'd already lost. They had unlimited resources, an army of lawyers, and the power to destroy anyone who challenged them. I had the truth. But I was learning that sometimes the truth wasn't enough. The courtroom was packed for the main hearing. Judge Elders had finally agreed to review our key evidence after Michael found a procedural argument she couldn't ignore. This was our last shot. I wore the same suit I'd worn the day they fired me, a deliberate choice. Richard Hale sat across the aisle, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression one of practiced concern. Tom Bradley flanked him, nervously adjusting his tie. Your Honor, Michael began. We will demonstrate that my client was terminated not for restructuring, but to silence her before she discovered a massive fraud. Blackwood immediately objected. Speculation and conspiracy theories, Your Honor. I'll allow it, Judge Elders said, surprising everyone. But Mr. Reyes, you better have proof. Michael called me to the stand. For 2 hours, I walked through my 15 years at Vertex, my expertise, my record. Then came the crucial moment. Ms. Carson, what did you discover after your termination? I looked directly at Richard Hale. I discovered that Vertex Dynamics has been falsifying revenue for 2 years, inflating their value by $2.3 billion to facilitate a fraudulent acquisition. The courtroom erupted. Judge Elders hammered her gavel. Order! Blackwood was on his feet. Objection! These are baseless accusations. I have the proof, I said, louder than intended. The courtroom went silent. Michael introduced the evidence piece by piece, the doctored spreadsheets, the shell companies, the email chains. Each document was fought over. But Judge Elders, perhaps sensing the magnitude of what was unfolding, began overruling Blackwood's objections. Then came the recording, Richard's voice, clear and undeniable. Emily's too thorough. She'll spot the Sigma prep during the audit. We need her gone before Q4. Richard's face went pale. Tom Bradley looked like he might vomit. Your Honor, Michael said, this recording proves deliberate termination to cover fraud, but there's more. He called a surprise witness, Kevin, who we thought had disappeared. Turns out he'd been in FBI protective custody after reporting the fraud to federal authorities. Mr. Park, Michael asked, what did you witness at Vertex? Kevin's testimony was devastating. He'd been asked to create false entries. He'd seen documents destroyed. He'd watched as employees who asked questions were systematically removed. Including Ms. Carson? Michael asked. Especially Ms. Carson. Mr. Hale said she was too smart for her own good. Blackwood's cross-examination was desperate. You're just trying to save yourself from prosecution, aren't you? No, sir. I've already pled guilty to my role. I'm here because the truth needs to be told. The moment that changed everything came when Michael recalled me for one question. Ms. Carson, why didn't you settle when they offered you money to go away quietly? I stood, facing the packed courtroom, the reporters, Richard Hale, and Judge Elders. Because they didn't just steal money. They stole my reputation, my career, my daughter's college fund, my family's security. They did it deliberately, coldly. And they laughed about it. My voice broke, but I continued. But worse, they were going to steal billions from investors, from employee retirement funds, from innocent people who trusted them. Someone had to stop them. Someone had to stand up and say, no more. The courtroom was silent. Even Blackwood seemed momentarily stunned. Then Jennifer burst through the courtroom doors. I want to testify, she announced, behind her. Marcus nodded. Me too. Judge Elders called a recess. When we returned, she looked different, angry. Mr. Blackwood, I've reviewed the evidence during recess. This court finds sufficient probable cause of fraud to warrant full discovery and investigation. She turned to Richard. Mr. Hale, I strongly suggest you consider settlement. And you should know, I'm forwarding all evidence to the Justice Department immediately. Richard stood abruptly and whispered urgently to Blackwood. Tom Bradley was already on his phone, probably with his lawyer. The death blow came from an unexpected source. The court clerk handed Judge Elders a note. She read it, her eyebrows rising. It seems the SEC has just frozen all Vertex Dynamics assets pending investigation. They're also freezing personal assets of Mr. Hale and Mr. Bradley. Richard's facade finally cracked. This is insane. She's destroying everything. 20 years of building this company. 20 years of fraud, I said, standing to face him. You destroyed me to protect your lies. Now your lies are destroying you. Ms. Carson, Judge Elders said sharply, but there was something like approval in her eyes. Michael stood. Your Honor, given this new development, we'd like to amend our damages request to include treble damages under the False Claims Act. How much are we talking about, Counselor? Based on the $2.3 billion fraud and my client's role as primary whistleblower, plus personal damages, we're seeking $100 million. Blackwood laughed bitterly. That's extortion. No, Judge Elders said quietly. That's justice. Mr. Blackwood, I strongly advise your clients to settle. This court has seen enough evidence to know that criminal prosecution is not just likely, but inevitable. The courtroom was chaos. Reporters rushed out to file stories. Vertex employees in the gallery sat stunned. Some were crying, realizing their stock options were worthless. As Richard was escorted out by federal agents who'd arrived to ensure he didn't flee, he stopped beside me. You've destroyed hundreds of jobs, he hissed. No, Richard. You did that the moment you decided to build an empire on lies. Sophie was waiting in the hallway with Daniel. She ran to me, and I dropped to my knees to hug her. Did you win, Mommy? I looked over her shoulder at Michael, who was already fielding calls from Vertex's board about settlement, at Jennifer and Marcus, who were crying with relief, at the reporters whose headlines would tomorrow proclaim the truth. Not yet, baby, but we're about to. The settlement negotiations happened in a gleaming conference room 40 floors above the city. Vertex's board had fired Richard and Tom within hours of the hearing. They'd brought in emergency management and were desperately trying to salvage something from the wreckage. Across the massive oak table sat Harrison Blackwood, looking defeated, and 3 board members I recognized from annual reports. Their new CEO, brought in that morning, was a woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in corporate crisis management. Ms. Carson, Patricia began, we want to make this right. You can't, I said simply. You can't give me back the months of humiliation. You can't erase my daughter seeing her mother broken. You can't undo the damage to my reputation. But we can try to provide compensation, she said carefully. The board has authorized me to offer $50 million, sir. Michael laughed. After what we proved in court, after the FBI raided your offices this morning. Try again. The lead board member, an elderly man named William Foster, leaned forward. The company is facing bankruptcy. If we pay what you're asking, hundreds of innocent employees lose everything. They already have, I responded. Their stock options are worthless because of Richard's fraud. Their reputation is destroyed. At least with bankruptcy, they qualify for unemployment and can move on. $75 million, Patricia offered. 100, Michael countered. Not a penny less. Plus full reinstatement of Ms. Carson's benefits, a public apology, and cooperation with all federal investigations. Blackwood started to object, but Patricia silenced him with a look. She understood what I'd learned the hard way. Sometimes the cover-up costs more than the crime. We need time to discuss, she said. We waited in a separate room. Michael was confident, but I felt strange, empty. I'd focused so hard on this moment that I hadn't thought about what came after. You know, Jennifer said, sitting beside me, we didn't just expose them. We probably saved thousands of future victims. She was right. The Sigma acquisition would have created a massive bubble. destroying investor confidence and retirement funds across the market when it inevitably burst. After 3 hours, they called us back. "The board has voted," Patricia announced. "We agree to your terms. $100 million, paid within 30 days. Full benefits reinstated retroactively. And this?" She pushed a document across the table. It was a public statement, admitting wrongdoing, apologizing specifically to me, and acknowledging that I was terminated for refusing to participate in fraudulent activities. "We'll also be recommending to the Justice Department that you receive the Maximum Whistleblower Award," she added. "That's potentially another $300 million from recovered funds." My hands shook as I signed the settlement. $100 million. From terminated and desperate to wealthy beyond my wildest dreams. All because I refused to stay silent. But the real victory came next. "Additionally," William Foster said, his voice heavy, "the board wants to offer you something else. Patricia will be interim CEO for 6 months while we stabilize. We'd like you to return as Chief Financial Officer to help clean up this mess. Full authority to implement new controls, reporting directly to the board." I almost laughed. The job they'd destroyed me to keep me from doing, now offered on a silver platter. "Double my previous salary," I said, "and I want to bring in my own team." "Done." I looked at Michael, who nodded, at Jennifer and Marcus, who were smiling through tears, at the company that had tried to destroy me, now begging for my help. "I'll think about it," I said, standing to leave. The news broke within hours. Vertex pays record $100 million to wrongfully terminated whistleblower. The stories called me a hero, a warrior, a symbol of speaking truth to power. Richard Hale was arrested at his country club, hauled away in handcuffs as news cameras rolled. Tom Bradley tried to flee to Costa Rica but was arrested at the airport. They both faced 25 years in federal prison. That night, I sat with Daniel and Sophie at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd calculated how many months before bankruptcy. "Mommy's rich now?" Sophie asked, not quite understanding. "No, baby," I said, pulling her close. "Mommy's free." Daniel opened a bottle of champagne, the good stuff we'd been saving for a special occasion that never came during my Vertex years. "So what now?" he asked. "Take the CFO job? Start your own firm? Retire to a beach somewhere?" I thought about it. The money meant we'd never worry again. Sophie could go to any college. Daniel could pursue his art without worrying about clients. We could have the life they'd tried to steal from us. "First," I said, raising my glass, "we're going to take a vacation, a real one. Then," I smiled, "then I'm going to accept their offer. Someone needs to make sure this never happens again." The next morning, I walked back into Vertex Dynamics. The same security guards who'd escorted me out now opened doors for me. The same executives who'd avoided my eyes now nodded respectfully. The same building that had expelled me now needed me to survive. I paused at what used to be my old desk, now just an empty cubicle. A young analyst approached nervously. "Ms. Carson, I just wanted to say, thank you. You saved our futures. You showed us that standing up to power is possible." As I rode the elevator to the executive floor, my new domain, I thought about the journey. From the woman crying in a parking garage with a cardboard box to the woman who brought down a $1 billion fraud. They'd tried to destroy Emily Carson. Instead, they'd created something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing to lose and everything to prove. The elevator doors opened to the C-suite. Patricia Chen stood waiting. "Ready to get to work?" she asked. "I've been ready for months," I replied, walking into the office that should have been mine all along. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the city sprawling below. Somewhere out there, in other gleaming towers, other Richard Hales were doctoring numbers, destroying lives, believing themselves untouchable. They were wrong. The judge's gavel fell with finality. This court awards Emily Carson $100 million in damages, the largest whistleblower settlement in this state's history. The courtroom exploded, reporters surged forward, cameras flashed like lightning. But I heard none of it. All I could see was Richard Hale, slumped in his chair, his empire in ruins. Tom Bradley was already in federal custody, having been arrested that morning, trying to destroy evidence. As the federal marshals approached Richard with handcuffs, he turned to me one last time. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen in his eyes before: fear. Was it worth it? He asked as they cuffed him. Destroying everything I built? You destroyed it yourself, I replied. I just showed the world what was already broken. They led him away, past the cameras, past his former employees, past the life he'd built on lies. The news would later report that he cried during booking, the mighty Richard Hale, reduced to a number in federal prison. Outside the courthouse, the February sun felt warm on my face, the same sun that had witnessed my humiliation 4 months earlier when I'd carried that cardboard box to my car. Now, hundreds of supporters had gathered, holding signs: Justice for Emily. Truth wins. Corporate accountability now. Michael stood beside me at the podium they'd set up for the press conference. My client would like to make a statement. I looked out at the sea of faces: reporters, former colleagues, strangers who'd followed the case. Sophie and Daniel stood in the front row, beaming with pride. 4 months ago, I began, my voice steady and clear. Vertex Dynamics threw me away like trash after 15 years of loyalty. They thought I would disappear quietly, another casualty of corporate greed. They thought wrong. The crowd erupted in applause. I raised my hand for silence. This victory isn't just mine. It's for every employee who's been discarded to protect corruption, for every whistleblower who's been silenced, for everyone who's been told that fighting back is pointless because corporations are too powerful to fall. I held up the settlement check, $100 million made out to Emily Carson. They tried to take everything from me: my career, my reputation, my family's security. But they made one fatal mistake. They left me with nothing to lose and gave me every reason to fight. More applause, louder now. Someone started chanting, "Emily, Emily," and others joined in. Today, Richard Hale and Tom Bradley face 25 years in federal prison. Vertex Dynamics is under federal oversight. The $2.3 billion fraud has been exposed. And this check? I smiled. This is just the beginning. I'm establishing the Carson Foundation for Corporate Accountability. Half of this settlement will fund legal support for whistleblowers who can't afford to fight back. The crowd went wild. Daniel was crying. Sophie waved at me, and I blew her a kiss. A reporter shouted over the noise, "Emily, what would you say to other employees facing similar situations?" I gripped the podium, looking directly into the main news camera. Document everything, trust your instincts, and remember, they can take your job, but they can't take your truth. Every empire built on lies eventually falls. Sometimes it just needs someone brave enough to push. What's next for you? Another reporter called out. First, a long vacation with my family. Then, I glanced at Michael, who nodded. Then we go after the next one, because Richard Hale wasn't unique. There are corporate criminals in boardrooms across this country, and they've just been put on notice. As we descended the courthouse steps, supporters reached out to shake my hand, to thank me, to share their own stories of corporate abuse. An elderly woman grabbed my arm, tears in her eyes. My husband lost his pension to corporate fraud, she whispered. No one ever paid. Thank you for fighting. Later, in Michael's office, after the crowds had dispersed and the cameras had moved on to the next story, I sat with my family. The check sat on the table between us, a piece of paper worth more than I'd have earned in 3 lifetimes at Vertex. You know what the best part is? Daniel asked, holding my hand. The money? The justice? Richard in handcuffs? No, he said softly. It's having my wife back. The fighter I married, not the broken woman they tried to create. Sophie climbed into my lap. Mommy, are you still sad about losing your job? I hugged her tight, thinking about the journey from that dark bathroom floor with pills in my hand to this moment of absolute vindication. No, baby. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out who you really are. As the sun set over Ridgewater, painting the sky the color of triumph, I stood at Michael's window, looking out at the city. Vertex Dynamics' logo was being removed from their building. The company would rebrand, trying to distance itself from the scandal. But everyone would remember. Everyone would know what happened when one woman refused to be silenced. My phone buzzed with messages, job offers, speaking requests, book deals. Tomorrow, I'd start deciding what came next. But tonight, I was going home with my family, ordering pizza, and watching movies like a normal family, something we hadn't been able to do during those dark months of uncertainty. As we left the office, Michael called out, "Emily, you realize what you've done, right? You've changed the game. Every corrupt executive in America is going to think twice now." I turned back, remembering the woman who'd sat in her car 4 months ago, fired and humiliated, wondering if life was worth living. "Good," I said. "Let them think. Let them worry. Let them wonder if the next employee they betray might be the one who brings them down." The elevator doors closed on Michael's grin. In the reflection of the polished steel, I saw myself, not the broken woman they'd discarded, not even the warrior who'd fought back, but something new, something powerful. They had burned me down to ashes, thinking that was the end of Emily Carson. They never imagined I'd rise from those ashes with fire in my hands. They never imagined that fire would consume their empire and light the way for others to follow. They'd fired me like a worthless ember. I'd returned as an inferno, and I'd burned their lies to the ground. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, courage, and ultimate justice. I hope Emily's journey inspired you to stand up against injustice in your own life. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Emily's position? Your stories and perspectives make this community special. Until next time, remember, sometimes the biggest victories come from the darkest moments.